Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. So today, as we're talking about, and we're in our unit here on the law and you, today we're going to be talking about criminal law. So we've been talking about civil law and the idiosyncrasies that go along with civil law and tort and family law. We talked about that in the last lesson. So today we're going to talk about criminal law. And while criminal law is very common on TV and in movies and fiction and in real life and criminal cases, I'm not going to assume that you know anything about criminal law. So we're going to kind of start from the ground floor here and go over the basics. And maybe today, some of those shows that you watch that talk about criminal law will make a little bit more sense to you on why things progress the way they do, and kind of understand why in our society the criminal court system is set up the way it is, and why it's set up the way it is, plus what are some of these criticisms that our criminal law system still has today. All right, let's go ahead and get started. All right, criminal law. So the big difference between criminal law and civil law is that the burden of proof is on the prosecution. What that means is you're not being sued by another person like you would in a civil case. In a criminal law, in a criminal case, if you're in trouble, and again, I don't mean to keep throwing you under the bus and saying you're in trouble. If I'm in trouble, the state or the district that I'm in, or the federal government, depending on the crime, they are the ones that are trying to convict me of the crime that I am being accused of. And it is their responsibility to prove that I did it. If they can't prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that I am guilty, I am not guilty, because I am innocent until proven guilty. There's a higher threshold of proof that has to be held in a criminal court, because you have to prove that they did it in order for consequences to happen. We designed our Constitution that way, because the last thing we want to do is send innocent people to jail. But jail isn't always the end-all be-all punishment for crime. There are two primary types of criminal laws. Every case is going to fall into one or two categories if I am arrested for a criminal offense. It's either going to be a misdemeanor or it's going to be a felony, and it's very different on the route my punishments could turn out to be, depending on whether my crime is considered a misdemeanor or a felony. So misdemeanors, these are criminal offenses, but they're not catastrophic. Like if I'm out spray painting somebody's building, if I go to CVS and steal some lipstick because I want my lips to look pretty, and I'm arrested for that, that is a criminal charge brought against me. All right. However, it's going to be a misdemeanor. All right. And the punishments, the possible punishments for that aren't going to be nearly what they could be if it was a felony, which is, and here in this examples go the murder, treason, robbery, kidnapping, rape, the worst things that the worst parts of human society. Those are felonies, all right? But it's not necessarily just you're one or the other, because here's a little graph here. Felonies there in the middle, misdemeanors there on the right, and classic first degree, second degree, third degree, fourth degree. So depending on the crime, it's kind of ranked of how severe it is. So even just because it's a felony or a misdemeanor, they're still ranked up one side and down the other based on how severe they are and what your possible punishment could be. So obviously, first degree murder, all right, that's you could be looking at life in prison. That's like the worst one. Whereas some of the misdemeanors, like parking in a handicapped space, that's against the law. That's a criminal offense. You're probably not going to prison for that. It's either a fine or a community service or something along those lines. So criminal offenses are drastic on one side or other, but very rarely it's got to be a pretty severe misdemeanor to go to jail for a misdemeanor. Typically, jail and prison is associated with felonies. There are ways you go to jail for a misdemeanor. For severe ones, it kind of depending on the state that you're in, of where that, like a DUI, driving under the influence, depending on the state, that could be a very severe misdemeanor, or it could be a low-level felony, depending on your state and a lot and other situations like that. So it's hard for me to give definite examples on like what falls where, because a lot of those rules will vary from state to state on what is actually which one. So the question here is, what is the difference in punishment depending on if a crime is a misdemeanor or felony? And we talked about that, basically, like if it's a misdemeanor, what are some of the punishments, and if it's a felony, what are some of the punishments? So answer that completely, and we'll move on. All right. So let's go through some terminology here to make sure that we're all on the same page on what different things are when it comes to criminal law. And again, while I don't expect you to know all this, because people watch TV and there's, court cases are always over the TV. Some of this, if you don't know any of this, that's completely fine. But some of it should register with you, but we're going to try to keep it simple here. Give a baseline for everybody to understand criminal law. So, criminal law, obviously, it's not civil law. Criminal law means that the state or the federal government is accusing you of a crime, and it is their responsibility to prove you have done something wrong that has broken a law. Civil law is, my tree falls on neighbor's goat, neighbor sues me for the loss of his goat. That's civil law. People don't go to jail in civil law. In criminal law, especially if it's a felony, absolutely. So we're going to kind of talk about the processes of criminal law today. There is something in criminal law, or really any court, is the court docket. It's just the court's calendar of what is going to be taking place that day, what's upcoming. And this, if you look up pictures of court dockets, they're usually like printouts of like legal documents, and they're like seem hard to follow and understand, especially if you find ones from like the 70s and they're all handwritten and they're complicated, not easy to read. This is a courthouse. It was Allen Superior Court, which is a real court somewhere. I've never seen one this nice. This is like an airport. Here's what's taking place today. Here's what's going to happen. So not only is a docket a breakdown of what's happening that day in the court and what judges where and how they're organized that day. If me, I'm not going to keep saying you, I'm not going to keep putting you on trial for felonies. If I'm on trial for a felony and it's a long drawn out process, I would have, my court case would have its own docket, like its own calendar of events that have happened and hope to transpire. So a docket is just a term used for like the court calendar. So they literally could say the court calendar, and it would be the same thing, but it's called the court docket. All right, let's talk about lawyers for a second. There's two main types of lawyers, especially in criminal law. You got the prosecution and you got the defense. I'm on trial for a felony, all right? So I should not defend myself. It never works out well. Even if I was the greatest lawyer on earth, I'm not. Even if I was the greatest lawyer on earth, I should never defend myself. That's just law 101. You don't want to defend yourself. So I would need an attorney. I need a lawyer to represent me, to basically be my voice and be a level head here and do a lot of the work to prove my case. If I'm saying I'm not guilty, I want them to go prove that I'm not guilty. All right? So that would be a defense attorney, because they are defending me. All right? Defense attorneys can be very expensive. So sometimes rich people, when they get in trouble, they buy lawyers. It's pretty much you go and you hire a bunch of lawyers, a bunch of really good lawyers, and it's all hands on deck, and they do everything they can to try to help you be successful in whatever you're hoping to have the outcome of the case be. If I'm saying I'm not guilty, to be not guilty. We'll talk about plea deals here in a second. The prosecution The prosecution is hired by the state or the federal government, depending if it's state court or it's federal court. The prosecution's job would be to prove that I'm guilty. Because we want to talk about how it gets to that point in a criminal case, but at this point, they are convinced, meaning the prosecution and the state or the federal government, whoever has me on trial, is convinced I'm guilty. That's why I'm here in court. It is their responsibility to prove that I'm guilty. My defense attorney got to go battle them and like try to convince them I'm not guilty. The people who decide is going to be a jury. All right. So a prosecution works for the state. That's who, or the federal government. That's who pays them. Defense attorneys work for me, trying to prove my case. Now, and this we'll mention this later on. If I have $0 to my name, I will be appointed a defense attorney. The court will pay for them to come to defend me. Typically, they are not as good as the really expensive ones. That's why the really expensive ones can be like, I'm not going to work for the court system, but the defense attorneys, especially the new ones, kind of get started there being a court-appointed attorney. Not that they're bad, especially if you're innocent. It's usually pretty easy to prove somebody's innocent if they're innocent because there's not proof to prove that they're guilty. If I know 100% I'm guilty and there's like video evidence of it and I'm like, I'm not guilty, and my defense attorney's like, is that really what you want to do? I'm like, yeah, you get me off. They're like, alrighty. And it's probably not going to go well regardless of how much money that I spend. You can't change evidence. All right. There is in the criminal law something that is, and it's worthy, it's a rule that exists in a lot of places that just seems crazy. And we're really seeing it now as the views on marijuana are changing over time. And you're like, marijuana? How are we going to start talking about marijuana? Let me explain. So the belief was, in the 70s, there was a spike in crime in America. And they started realizing these violent criminals, when they would arrest them, they had been arrested on felony after felony after felony of smaller stuff over time, and then they do some crazy big, they murder somebody. And the belief is, you know what? We knew these were bad people. So, and all the states here that have a color, if the gray doesn't apply to them, every state here that has a color ends up coming up with some version of the 3 strikes law. Meaning, if you are convicted of 3 felonies, on your 3rd felony, regardless of what it is, you get life in prison or some extreme version of that, which is 25 years, which is a whole nother conversation. That if on your 3rd felony, it is life in prison. Now, here's what's crazy about that. In the 80s and 90s and in the early 2000s, having marijuana is a felony. So there are people who got busted in the 80s or 90s and early 2000s 3 separate times for having marijuana. Now, obviously, that's kind of the extreme view here, but it's something that is not of violent nature. And the 3rd time people are busted with marijuana, which is a felony, even if it's a small amount because the drug laws are so strict, get put in prison for life. What basically happened is the majority, that's around 50%, of the people in jail for life are in jail for life for non-violent offenses. So and people are looking at these 3 strike laws. When Barack Obama left office in 2016, a lot of these people that were in prison for the exact situation that I mentioned, that they marijuana, 3 felonies. Barack Obama can pardon people, that the president can pardon. It's something that they're allowed to do, and commuted the sentence of a lot of those people that were serving life sentences for that. But it's still, while the idea was get these lifetime criminals off the streets, it didn't necessarily go according to plan, because a lot of what happened is our prisons are busting at the seams, and half the people that are in the prison system are non-violent criminals. Granted, there's a considerable debate around that, but that is the current viewpoint on that. All right, let's talk about the difference in jail and prison. If you go to jail, it's not the same as going to prison. It's not. Jail is if you get arrested. I keep having you get arrested. If I get arrested for literally anything, they take me to jail. That's they put me in the police car. They take me to jail. They fingerprint me. They leave me in jail. All right. So then after I have my court date and all this other stuff, I stay in jail unless I can pay bail, which is a whole other thing. I stay in jail until I am convicted of my crime or I am acquitted, found not guilty. If I'm found not guilty, I go home. If I am convicted of my crime, I will then go to prison. All right, prison is long-term jail. Now, jail, you can stay in jail. Like if you have, you've been convicted of a crime and you have a 6-month sentence. You can, depending on the situation, serve that in a local jail as opposed to going off to a prison somewhere. But prison is typically more severe crimes and longer sentences. Jail is more local and it's short term. So the question here is, why do many people criticize the 3 strikes rule, and what was the purpose of creating it? So answer that in complete sentences. We talked about that. Pause me if you need to, and we'll move on. All right, let's talk about the steps to a criminal case. So here's the process that you go through. You're not going through this process. I really need to fix that on this unit. I need to stop accusing y'all of being criminals. I keep saying that, and I keep doing it. And let's be honest, at this point, I'll probably keep doing it. Maybe that's my criminal offenses. I keep accusing y'all of being a false accusatory. Not a thing. Anywho, all right. I get arrested. All right. I do something bad. I don't even want to pretend like I did something really bad. But I did something bad. We'll say I did something. It's a felony. It's bad. All right. And I'm arrested. All right. So the police, they come and they arrest me. All right. And they take me to jail. That's step 1. Step 2, and this, again, you have to be brought in front of a judge very quickly because you have a right as an American citizen to know what the rules are against you. So the first thing that happens is you are brought in front of a judge within 24 hours. I do believe it's on a weekend that you're arrested and it's a holiday. There's you can wait until the next work day. If you're arrested on Saturday, you might have to wait till Monday to see the judge. But other than that, it's 24 hours. They bring you in front of the judge, and while you should at this point already know what your charges are, it is official. They're like, all right, you are charged with whatever awful thing that I did. All right, and that's what the judge says to me. So it says, you're charged with whatever. I'm like, oh no, I don't know. So then the judge will set bail for me. Bail is interesting. So bail, they just want to make sure I show up. Now, if I went out and murdered a whole bunch of people, they're not going to give me bail. They have the right to be like, it's too messed up. You can't do that. If I was out stealing cars, that's what we're going to say. I was stealing cars. Grand theft auto. I can handle that. I didn't hurt anybody, but that's definitely going to prison for that. Can't steal people's property. Grand theft auto. I was out stealing cars, and he's like, man, I really need you to show up to court. All right. So he knows that, all the money I have is $100,000, in my house, everything combined, they'll say it's $100,000. The judge might say, all right, your bail is $100,000. And you're like, what? What a jerk. What would he do? What that means is basically I have to give them basically my house or put up collateral, $100,000. They don't keep that. They don't keep bail. Basically what that means is they're going to let me leave because remember, I'm innocent until they prove I'm guilty and they're just letting me know what the charges are. My court date might not be for a month. So I can leave if I give them that $100,000 or whatever. And it depends, if I was a billionaire, it would be more than $100,000. It depends on the person. So it has to be fair. So I give it to them. I get it back when I show up to court. I mean, that's I get back. They give it right back to me. All right. However, I shouldn't say $100,000. That's a really high bill, but stealing cars, whatever, thousands of dollars. If I don't show up to court, not only are they keeping it, there's a whole bunch of other problems I have for like skipping out on bail. This is where bail bondsmen come in. You can go pay a bail bondsman like 10%. Say it's $50,000, but you don't have $50,000. You can pay a bail bondsman $5,000. They will go put that $50,000 of their own money up and let you get out of jail. However, you don't get that $5,000 back. And the bail bondsman doesn't get their money back until you show up. Till you show up to court. So if you don't show up to court and a bail bondsman has put your bail out there, they don't get their money back till you show up, and they will hunt you down. This is like famous TV bounty hunters, like Dog the Bounty Hunter. That's his job. He basically loaned people the money to get out of jail, and then they didn't show up to court, and he's got to go hunt them down and drag them back to court so he can get his money back. That's bail bondsman. So the preliminary hearing just lets you know what your crime is, what you're accused of, and how it's going to go forward from there. So an indictment. This is something that I'm going to guess, unless you're super into criminal law, didn't even know this happens. So after the judge reads out what you have been charged with. Now the judge hadn't looked over it. He's like, all right, you got arrested. Here's the charges. The judge then sends this off to a grand jury. These are people that sit in a room in the back. And they will decide. They will look at the situation. They're looking on paper. They can bring in witnesses and stuff. They rarely do. They're looking at this to see, all right, so Mr. Wagstaff took a car that doesn't belong to him and drove it to another state. Yeah, he clearly did that, yes. And the grand jury is the one that agrees to the charges. Now, it is possible they'd be like, wait a minute, Mr. Wagstaff asked to borrow that. It was his own car. You can't steal it. Like, I don't know what the situation would be. Like, you can't steal your own car. No, we're not going to charge him. So these people kind of sit in the back and they just look at the paper. And these are just like a jury. They are picked to go do this for a handful of cases to verify, is this person that's being charged, is this a legit crime? And the reason they do that is you don't want, the police or the justice system going out and just throwing charges at anybody they want. It has to go through a grand jury. It has to go through the public. So in my case here, I'm going to be indicted because I stole them cars. I did it. But shh, I'm not going to tell them that yet. So the grand jury or the judge, depending on the state and the situation, here's the evidence and then formally will charge me with grand theft auto. So then the arraignment, once I'm officially charged, they bring me back in. This is where I get my bail back, all right? Or step one of getting my bail back. I show back up and they say, how do you plead? You plead guilty or not guilty? Now, I'll play both sides of this. Part of me is like, not guilty. And they're like, all right, we're going to have a trial to see if you're guilty or not. If I know that I'm guilty. If they can prove it, even if, I'm like, yeah, I did it. I'm guilty. There's a benefit to pleading guilty. If you plead guilty, it's so much easier on the court. It's easier on society. It also shows that you have remorse. You're admitting you were wrong. Typically, whatever the punishment is, they will make a deal with you, and it's called a plea bargain. If you admit that you're guilty, instead of having 10 years in prison, it'll be 6 years in prison if you admit that you're guilty, all right? And a plea bargain, so most cases don't go to trial because people know if they're guilty or not. They're like, okay, I'm guilty. I'm not going to win this court case. And they just admit they're guilty and they get a lesser sentence, all right? And that's pretty much the end of it. We'll get to the sentencing phase here in a second. That's the end of the trial portion if I plead guilty. But let's go pretend Mr. Wagstaff says, didn't do it and you can't prove it. All right, let's have a trial. That's the next step. The prosecution, the person that's hired by the state or the federal to prove that I'm guilty of stealing cars, the prosecution tries to convince the jury here that I'm guilty, whereas my defense lawyer is trying to prove I am not guilty. I didn't do it, or instead of just saying I didn't do it, or they don't have enough evidence to prove it. It could have been anybody stealing them cars. It could have been everybody that's like Mr. Wagstaff. They can't be sure it was him, because you have to know there cannot be any doubt in your mind that the person committed the crime. If you're like, that might not have been him, even though it probably was, you can't convict them, all right? So they'll argue, and then it goes to the jury. The jury, they're the ones that are sent off to deliberate and decide whether or not I'm guilty or not. And then they come back and they're going to have the verdict. So the verdict, basically, the jury decides, did Mr. Wagstaff steal them cars or not? Well, if they say no, he's not guilty, or I'm acquitted, I just turn around, I just walk out, I'm done. Like it was a big waste of everybody's time. All right. So if they say I'm not guilty, over and done with. All right. If they say I'm guilty, all right, if they're like, no, you are guilty, then it goes to the next phase. Typically, after they say I'm guilty, and the whole courtroom's like, oh, he's guilty. They will put me in handcuffs and they'll take me to jail. They're not letting me go home at that point because I have been convicted. However, I don't know what my punishment is yet. All right. Usually sentencing happens on another day, especially in big trials where everybody's like emotionally invested in it and everybody calms down. So I'll go back on another day for my sentencing for stealing cars. And this is me. You can tell by the hair, it's me. So that the judge will determine what your sentence is. This, based off the laws, like how severe was it, how many years in prison are you going to have? This sentencing is the last thing where the judge decides how long you're in jail. He's not the one who decided you're guilty. The jury of your peers is the one who's decided you're guilty. He decides how long you're going to jail for. All right. So this is a very interesting question right here. I want to explain this because people, it happens all the time. So the question is, why is it necessary to have such a complex system, even if everyone knows the person is guilty? What is the purpose of everyone getting a defense lawyer? I'll give you a general example. If somebody goes out and shoots a whole bunch of people in broad daylight and everybody's here videoing and cameraing and everybody sees it happen, and then that person gets arrested and goes to jail, he goes through this entire process. He's going to have a defense attorney. He's like, I'm not guilty. Everybody knows it. This guy gets a defense lawyer who's trying to defend this guy, saying he didn't do it. And everybody hates the defense lawyer because that seemed, I don't know if I could do it as a defense lawyer, but that defense lawyer is extremely important because you have a right to a fair trial. If nobody's, he did it, just throw him in jail, and the defense lawyer doesn't even try, and like, well, who cares, whatever. And then the state throws all this money at them to prosecute them and have them put in jail. You didn't get a fair trial, which, granted, that dude's like a serial killer and he shot a whole bunch of people in the street. He's still a United States citizen. And in the Constitution, all right, in the Bill of Rights, you have a right to a fair trial and you have to have your voice heard. So the defense lawyer is basically just the guy that argues for the guy that's being accused of it. The defense lawyer will be like, man, we all know you shot this dude. We all saw it. Well, but my client didn't do it. He was nowhere there. And the defense attorney knows he's lying. But if he doesn't do that and nobody defends that guy who wants to be defended, it's a mistrial. His rights weren't given to him and he can do the whole trial over, or worse, they can just throw the whole thing out because it wasn't done right and he goes free. Having a defense attorney, even for people that just seem completely worthless and done awful things, is necessary to prove that the system works right and that everybody has a fair trial, so that when this dude gets put in jail for 6,000 years, he can't be like, but I didn't have a fair trial. Yeah, you did. You got that defense attorney and he tried to defend you and you're still guilty. you had all your rights given to you and you're still guilty, 6,000 years in jail. So it is very important that everybody gets a defense lawyer, even the super guilty ones that you know are guilty, because the reason that is important is because everybody's rights matter whether or not they are innocent or guilty. And in America, we're innocent till proven guilty. All right, so answer that completely. That's as far as we're going to get today. See you guys tomorrow.